Okay, welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous. You're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of the hour. Venezuelan opposition leader Marina Corina Machado vows to return quickly and praises Donald Trump for toppling Nicolas Maduro. But Trump appears keen to work with interim President Delcy Rodriguez for now, adding uncertainty in Venezuela. Ukraine's allies gather in Paris to finalize security guarantees to reassure Kyiv in the event of a ceasefire with Russia. President Zelensky warns more than 27 leaders and senior US negotiators as they work on a joint position for the future talks. Israel's foreign minister says recognizing Somaliland as an independent state is a moral decision during a high-profile visit. He says Israel is honored to be the first UN member to formally recognize the breakaway region. 4 people are killed in clashes between government personnel and Kurdish-led forces in Aleppo, with both sides blaming each other. State media says a defense ministry member dies, while reports say 2 women are killed as responsibility remains disputed. A top Trump aide says Greenland should become part of the United States to protect NATO and the Arctic, and refuses to rule out force. He says nobody will fight the US over Greenland, as Denmark and European allies warn such moves could end NATO. Authorities say no fire inspections were conducted for more than 5 years at the Crans Montana bar, where 40 people were killed. The mayor reveals the venue in question had not been checked since 2019. Activists say at least 35 people are killed and over 1,200 detained as protests continue across Iran with no sign of stopping. Reports say unrest has spread nationwide as authorities and security forces also report injuries amid rising tensions. China says it is strengthening controls on dual-use exports to Japan as tensions rise between the two countries. The Commerce Ministry says the new restrictions take effect immediately. Now we start in Europe this hour, and key allies of Ukraine, including European leaders and top US envoys, met in Paris today to discuss security guarantees for Kyiv in the event of a ceasefire with Russia. A draft statement seen ahead of the talks indicates that the United States would lead a ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanism, with European participation to ensure any peace deal is upheld. The plan also envisions a European-led multinational force deployed in Ukraine after a ceasefire. Washington would provide support for this force, including intelligence, logistics, and a commitment to respond in case of renewed Russian attacks. The force would operate on land, at sea and in the air, while also helping Ukraine rebuild its armed forces. Representatives from 35 countries, including 27 heads of state or government from Britain, Canada, Germany and Italy, attended the Coalition of the Willing Summit. The meeting, hosted by French President Emmanuel Macron, also included Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US Special Envoys. Joining us now to discuss this is Mark Sutherland, a geopolitical commentator. He joins me live from London. Thank you very much, Mark, for joining us here on NewsX World. Of course, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thoughts from Paris today, Mark? Initial thoughts. We have some outcomes about a potential US-supported security guarantees in Kyiv for if a peace deal did in fact come to fruition. Do you think Zelensky will be pleased on the outcome today?
Good to be with you, Thomas. Will he be pleased? Well, I think we should all be pleased if we can get to the point where the fighting stops, as you and I have discussed. The issue is Russia invaded on February 2022. They have taken a lot of Ukrainian land. Will that be part of the negotiation to give back at all? Where will the new national boundaries be drawn? Will we then have a continued fight from the Ukrainians in a guerrilla warfare against the Russians to unfold in many years to over the next coming years. We will have all of that to look at. But as you and I've said, we want to see within Europe, we want to see this war stopped. And very sadly, after 3 or 4 weeks of that invasion, it could have stopped, as there was some peace deal on the table. But it seems that European leaders at that time and now have then sought to not really help that engagement and to get both sides around the table until the second administration of Donald J. Trump. It's good to see that the Americans would want to back this up. But again, the amount of cost this is of the willing to then put troops on the ground, that is also a consideration, and is also going to unfold. And just finally, Thomas, this has really shaken NATO, as you and I have said, over the last few months, and then also as the Americans have said, we want you to show your commitment. We've put so much money in. You need to step up and start spending more of your GDP. But of course, the European countries economically are not in a good shape whatsoever. Thomas.
Yes, and Mark, if the United States leads this ceasefire monitoring, what happens if Russia violates it repeatedly? Do you think Washington really has the appetite to enforce the consequences, particularly during the Trump administration?
You're asking a very, very important and profoundly deep question. The number one thing is, we've all known that when Donald Trump, before he became president, said, I'll be able to sort this out within 24 hours, 48 hours. Sadly, that has not been done. Now, whether the actions that were taken by the Americans in Venezuela by taking out Maduro will actually give the Russians pause for thought in regard to saying, well, maybe, the president, when he says he will do something, we need to believe him. You and I both know that also from their recent strategy statement of the 25-page paper, with the comments that have been made within Europe, by the administration, by people like J.D. Vance in regard to free speech and all the rest, they are not very happy with Europe whatsoever, and they want Europe to step up and sort this issue out themselves. To be honest, Thomas, I really don't know. There has also been this whole thing of America, various discussions on their side of the pond. They don't want to then get involved in another war, even though there's those accusations in regard to what just happened in Venezuela in their back door. There is so much up in the air, but the number one thing is to say this is a European issue, a European theatre of war. European countries, please step up and sort this out to the best of your ability. Thomas.
Yes, and a draft statement that has been seen ahead indicates the United States would lead this so-called ceasefire monitoring and verification system. Is there any historical comparisons that we can draw about what this might entail?
I suppose we end up looking at South Korea. We could look in that direction, no matter how many times various James Bond films have portrayed that. But I think that is something there, definitely to then look at. And of course, the whole Cold War, which is a huge discussion historically, the end of the Second World War, and we look at how far Stalin's forces had then advanced, and then borders pushed in regard to East Germany and Poland, borders changing. All of that, I think, historically can be put into the mix, but it does come down to economically as well. I was just listening to your comments that are being made by the president when he's turning around and saying, we can't turn around our munitions that are needed fast enough, and we're needing to step up. And particularly when they made that comment in regard to India and Apache helicopters. All of that has to be paid, it has to be put into consideration. America is in debt by 37 trillion, would you believe? All of these things, even though they're finding where that has been going and crisscrossing around the world. But I think, to be fair, in my humble opinion, all those economic factors have to be paid in. But as we've just seen in South America, This is countries like Russia, China, Ital, who want a bipolar world, and America is then turning around and saying to itself, no, we want to be the number one hegemony here. So all of these factors are to play out here, Thomas.
Indeed. Mark, do stay with us as we move on to our next story. And Somalia has strongly condemned a visit by Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Saar to Somaliland, calling it an unauthorized incursion and a violation of Somalia's sovereignty. The Somali Foreign Ministry said the visit to Hargeisa, the capital of the breakaway region, was carried out without the consent of the federal government and is therefore illegal and invalid. The condemnation comes less than 2 weeks after Israel formally recognized Somaliland as an independent state, a move Somalia has firmly rejected. The latest dispute adds to rising diplomatic tensions over Somaliland's long-standing bid for international recognition. Mark, Gideon Saar, the Israel Foreign Affairs Minister, visiting Somaliland today. Israel, of course, the first UN-recognized country to recognise Somaliland itself. Your initial thoughts and the implications of such a decision that was made by Israel just around a week ago now?
I think it's a very, very clever move diplomatically. Remember historically that in 1960, Somalia then got independence as a protectorate from Britain, from the UK. And then in 1991, if my history serves me correct, then you would then have this sort of Somaliland breakaway of that joint country. And Somaliland has tried, unlike if we look at Somalia, to have elections that had even been passed as very well staged within groups like the EU, which is rather interesting. So the bottom line is we have seen since the 7th of October 2023, we've seen, of course, the Houthi rebels, etc., the disruption within and they're geographically somewhere else there within that part, and Israel is then looking at how to then broker peace, how to then firm up their security and their security concerns in that area. And if you look at the film footage, if you look at the footage of people from Somaliland celebrating that, then that can only be a good thing. As Israel said, that we will offer, input and advice in regard to agriculture and other methods like that to help them to increase their standard of living and their GDP. The other thing that has to be stated, depending on what you read, some people could say that to me as an accusation, that there is far less since 2008. The kind of terrorism that we may see in other areas is far less within the area of Somaliland. So I think it's a very clever move diplomatically, and of course, not surprisingly, Somalia says that. Various people have a few problems in Minnesota with those links that they need to sort out. So these are the issues. It's about, if you turn around to a country and say, we wish to help you, we wish to see your GDP and the quality of life within your country improve, then I think that's a good thing. But of course, as people would say, it comes down to ideology. It comes down to people disagreeing with that and how people then conduct themselves diplomatically. But I ask them to show me the evidence. Thomas, thank you.
Yes, and of course, in regards to the Horn of Africa, this decision has sparked condemnation from a plethora of countries. Do you think this does have the possibility of triggering wider instability, especially in Ethiopia, which has already flirted with the idea of recognising Somaliland as well?
Yes, and of course, then we have to think of Sudan and other areas. The bottom line is that we who are sensible, we want to see Africa flourish, an area a continent, a massive continent that has huge, incredible mineral resources and great opportunities. We want to see it flourish. We are very saddened by the amount of civil war and the amount of death, and also the attitude of, not appreciating life for whatsoever. So we want to see it. We want to see it flourish, and we want to see ideologies stop that don't want it to flourish. And of course, as you would say to me, in various countries from mid 50s, from the 60s, from 1960 have then gained their independence, and then it's taken so long for people to try and work that out, to have stable countries, to either establish a democracy when when in various countries the despots have actually been running them, then that is very, very difficult. I'm actually very hopeful, to be honest, Thomas. I think it's a very incredible diplomatic move that Israel has done. And then if it opens up the door for other people like Ethiopia, which also has a very sad history and is vast in the amount of miles that it is as a country, if it then takes that positive step, then I think that is a good thing. If people are spending the money in regard to perpetuating wars, that's another thing that we need to look at very much within the last 100 years. So I think that's a positive thing, Thomas. And frankly, without it seeing a bit of a cliche, we've got to step back and wait and see how these things roll out. But the number one thing is always positive, but people are prepared to talk to each other, lay down arms and say, let's how we can trade with each other and move forward. Thomas.
Mark Sutherland, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining
Thanks.
us here on NewsX World. We now move on over to the United States for our next story. And US President Donald Trump has repeatedly said the US should take over Greenland, arguing that it would benefit his nation's security. His demands have been rejected by the island's leaders and NATO member Denmark, of which Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory. Trump repeated previous calls for the US to take over Greenland following the US military raid on Venezuela, during which its president Nicolas Maduro and his wife were seized and removed to New York. The island's Prime Minister, Jens Frederik Nielsen, responded by saying, "That's enough now," describing the idea of US control as a fantasy. But Trump and his allies went on to reiterate their threats. The president said he was very serious about his plans, adding that Greenland was important for European as well as American security. Trump's stance has shocked Denmark, which has traditionally enjoyed close relations with Washington. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen warned that any effort to take over Greenland would spell the end of NATO, and citizens of Greenland have also expressed their disapproval. Trump and his plans for Greenland. Let's listen in.
Det lidt, man ved ikke om man skal tage ham alvorligt, eller om der lige pludselig kommer et eller andet. Så det sådan lidt.
Je crois que les commentaires du président Trump constituent des menaces envers les Groenlandais et notre société. Ce n'est pas quelque chose qui nous plaît. Ce n'est pas acceptable dans un monde civilisé. Nous demandons le respect pour notre pays et notre peuple. Nous sommes ouverts aux affaires et aux relations, mais uniquement sur une base de respect mutuel.
Joining us now is Dr. Satoru Nagao, a fellow at the Hudson Institute, joining us live from Tokyo, Japan. Dr. Nagao, as always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Of course, this has been an issue since the start of Donald Trump's 2.0 presidency. However, comments fell silent for a little while. Now they seem to have re-emerged. How do you think this is going to play out, given that Donald Trump's words on Venezuela was doubted by people? Do you think Donald Trump has the capability of undermining NATO sovereignty and seizing Greenland? And what implications do you think that will have?
View from the standpoint of the national security, it is true that Greenland is important now because the melting ice in the Arctic and China's activity or approaching to the Northern Atlantic. That is true, and it has rarely happening. So, but at the same time, President Trump's interest in the Greenland is based on the two issues, I think. Firstly, America tried to make sure their influence great again based on the American continent first. So that's why the Greenland is part of it. And another one is, of course, military. Place is important, and at the same time, view from the economic security or new technology, there are quite many mines in Greenland to provide the rare earths or other rare minerals for the high-tech weapons. So that's why anyway, Greenland is important now. But the problem is how to persuade Denmark and local people of the Greenland. And so without this, yes, you are right, it will create a deep rift in the NATO alliances. So that's true. And in this case, a little bit weak disadvantage Denmark has is, firstly, Denmark's government is prime minister as the middle left prime minister. So in case of the negotiation, currently the right wing has the advantage. For example, the Argentina, the Chile, the Honduras, this country does not face a problem because their government is right-wing. Instead of this, Colombia, the Brazil, this country, the left-wing lead country facing the problem with President Trump. So that's why in this case, Denmark has a problem. And in case of the Greenland is a big island, but population is nearly 50,000 to 60,000. This means that even if people say we have the right, indeed they cannot govern the full Greenland. So view from this, if there is a possibility, the agreement could happen between US and Greenland and Denmark, in this case, there's a possibility the area people cannot exploit it should be used by the United States, both military or developing mines. But the inhabited area in the Greenland should controlled by the local people. Such kind of, if the agreement has happened between two, there's a possibility they can agree, I think.
Yeah, and the Danish Prime Minister has said that this might be the end of NATO if the United States decides to annex the autonomous territory. What do you think of that statement? Do you agree?
America and Europe cooperation will face a problem, I think, because American side, anyway, President Trump say NATO is not so important in the past. And at that time, so because European needs the United States military power, but America do not need the European military power. So in case of the NATO, which one has the advantage in the negotiation is very clear, United States. US can say we do not need NATO, but the European cannot say we do not need NATO. So that's why in this negotiation, anytime US can say NATO is not important, but European cannot say like that. So Denmark can say this is a big problem for NATO to mobilize other European countries, but this is not a word to persuade the United States because US do not think this is important. So that's why in this case, what Denmark Prime Minister want to say is help Denmark to the other European countries. That is a remark. So there's a possibility the other European countries, United Kingdom, Germany, or France will move and try to persuade President Trump to create a cordial relation between US and Denmark. But in this case, anyway, without getting something big, President Trump will not agree. So in this case, the inhabited area of the Greenland, U.S. need to use for military purpose or mining purpose. That will happen in the future, I think. But one more thing, but I need to say, indeed, this in case of the Greenland, indeed, this is not the first time. When the President Trump sworn in as a president the first time, he has already mentioned of the Greenland. So acquiring Greenland is quite strategic long-term process for the President Trump lead the United States. So this is a strategic move. So Arctic issue, Northern Atlantic issue, or the dominance of the American continent, all of these issues are related strategically. So President Trump, anyway, will not back down, I think, in this case, as a long-term policy.
Yes. Dr. Nagao, as always, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us. We now move over to the Middle East, and Israeli forces have conducted a large-scale raid on Birzeit University in the occupied West Bank, injuring reportedly 11 students and prompting widespread condemnation. According to Palestinian officials, troops entered the campus during peak hours, firing live rounds, tear gas and stun grenades. 5 students were wounded by live fire, 4 suffered from tear gas inhalation, and 2 were injured in falls. All were taken to local hospitals for treatment. University authorities reported that the main gate was forcibly breached, student equipment was seized, and the Vice President for Academic Affairs was briefly detained. The Palestinian Ministry of Education has condemned the operation as a violation of international conventions that protect educational institutions. The incident comes amid increased Israeli military activity across the West Bank.
هذا أول اعتداء بالمعنى الكامل اللي هو بدخله قوات جيش احتلال بالفعل وأثناء تواجد الطلبة يعني بهذا الكم الهائل في داخل أسوار الجامعة. بالفعل كان وضع يعني لا نحسد عليه كجامعة لأنه كانت مستهدفة اللي خلينا نسميها الحياة الأكاديمية داخل أسوار
الهدف نراه هو ثني الجامعة عن القيام بمهامها وواجباتها التعليمية والمجتمعية والإنسانية.
Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international updates.